Peace and blessings, family. Welcome to another series of African history, or the history of African people globally. And today we are going to look into the so-called ZANJ Rebellion, which took place between 869 and 883 AD. When it comes to the history of the enslavement of African people, we are always told of the transatlantic slavery. We've seen the movies and books were written and etc. However, we have seen nothing in relation to the Trans Saharan slave trade, which is the enslavement of Africans by Arabs. Most people are not aware of this history, and the irony is that this is the oldest. The Arabs were the first people to target Africans to enslave. Prior to that, in more ancient times, people were targeted to be enslaved based on the community they came from. So, for example, in the Roman Empire, it was mostly Europeans that were enslaved due to having come from communities that were from lower cultures, whereas people from high culture were often had high status in the Roman Empire. Hence, you had so many black people, African people in high positions, the Roman Empire, the first bishops, etc., etc. So the Arabs were the first to actually enslave Africans purely because of their skin color. And when we speak of the earliest enslavement of African people by Arabs, the ZANJ Rebellion that we're talking about, the ZANJ Rebellion, took place between 869 and 883 AD, which predates the European enslaved trade by centuries. And in fact, there were two previous attempts. The first one was between 689 and 690 AD, and the second one in 694 AD. Both have failed, and we can see that if there was a rebellion in 689 AD, which predates the transatlantic slavery by at least about 800 years, we can see that Arabs had been enslaving Africans for the longest time. And in terms of the longest time, the longest running, we can still hear of the enslavement of African people by Arabs in countries such as Mauritania in the 21st century. So in the brief history of the ZANJ, the word ZANJ apparently means the land of the blacks, and I believe there's also negative connotations that were attached to the words. And so this was a name used by medieval Arab geographers to refer to both a certain portion of Southeast Africa, which was primarily the Swahili coast, and to the area's Bantu inhabitants. So the ZANJ Rebellion that took place between 869 and 883 was a revolt of the enslaved black people of Africa against the Abbasid Caliphate. A number of Iraqi Basran landowners had brought several thousand East Africans into southern Iraq to drain the salt marshes east of Basra. The landowners subjected the ZANJ, who generally spoke no Arabic, to heavy slave and provided slave labor and provided them with only minimal subsistence. In September 869, Ali ibn Muhammad, a Persian claiming descent from Ali, the fourth caliph, and Fatima, Muhammad's daughter, gained support of several slave work crews, which could number from 500 to 5,000 men. By pointing out the injustice of their social position and promising them freedom and wealth, Ali's offers became even more attractive with the subsequent adoption of the Kharijite religious stance. Anyone, even an enslaved African, could be elected caliph, and all non-Kharijites were infidels threatened by a holy war. So often people would make light of the fact that they would make light of the Arab enslavement in comparison to the enslavement of African people in the Arab world because of the Kharijite religious stance that anyone, even an enslaved African, could be elected caliph. So, but that does not remove the fact that the Arabs actually invented the branding of black people specifically for enslavement. They invented that concept, which they then introduced to Europeans, because even when the transatlantic slavery and slave trade started, it was the Arabs that were heavily involved in, they basically initiated Europeans into the craft, the witchcraft. So ZANJ forces grew rapidly in size and power, absorbing the well-trained black contingents that defected from the defeated Caliphate army, along with some disaffected local peasantry. In October 869, they defeated a Basran force, and soon afterward a ZANJ capital, Al-Muqtara, which means the chosen in Arabic, was built on an inaccessible dry spot in the salt flats surrounded by canals. The rebels gained control of southern Iraq by capturing Al-Ubula in June 870 AD, a seaport on the Persian Gulf, and cutting communications to Basra, then seized Avaz in southwestern Iran. The Caliphate armies, now entrusted to Muwafaq, who was actually the brother of the new Caliph, Al-Mutamid, who actually reigned between 870 and 892 AD, still could not cope with the rebels. So the ZANJ sacked Basra in September 879 and subsequently defeated Al-Muwafaq himself in April 872 AD. So we can see that African people have been heavily resisting slavery for a very long time, because we were never slaves. We were prisoners of wars. And so the ZANJ between 872 and 879, while Al-Muwafaq was occupied in eastern Iran with the expansion of the Safavids, an independent Persian dynasty, the ZANJ seized Wasil in 878 and established themselves in Khuzestan in Iran. In 879, however, Al-Muwafaq, organized a major offensive against African warriors. Within a year, the second ZANJ city, Al-Mani, the Impregnable, was taken. African freedom fighters were next expelled from Khuzestan in the spring of 881. Al-Mufaq lay siege to Al-Muqtara from a special city built on the side of the Tigris River. 2 years later, in August of 883, reinforced by outside support, Al-Muwaffaq finally crushed the rebellion, conquering the city and returning to Baghdad with Ali's head. So we can see that our ancestors have always been great warriors. It even took this Al-Muwaffaq, excuse me. It took him to get extra support for his armies to be able to defeat the Afrikans, who were actually very far away from home and from their own people. So this ends the video. If you have enjoyed it, please do like and do share the video. If you're new to the channel, press that subscribe button and that notification bell for more exciting videos on African history. Peace and Black Power.